Iran just made the worst decision it has made since the war began. Not a provocative statement, not a diplomatic insult, not a mine quietly laid in the dark, a deliberate daytime drone strike on a commercial cargo ship transiting the Strait of Hormuz, 8 days after Iran's own president had signed a ceasefire agreement with the United States and Switzerland and promised the world that the shooting was over. President Trump read about it on the morning of June 26, 2026. He did not wait for a briefing. He did not call a National Security Council meeting. He went directly to his social media platform and posted 3 words that the entire world read within minutes. And then, less than 24 hours later, U.S. Central Command aircraft were already over Iran. Striking. Again. This is what happens when you sign a peace deal on a Friday and shoot at a cargo ship the following Thursday. The United States does not negotiate with ambiguity. It responds with precision. And what it struck in those 48 hours has set Iran's military back further than anything since the war began on February 28th. Here is exactly what Iran did, why it did it, what Trump did in response, and what the next 60 days mean for a region that is one bad decision away from full-scale war resuming. To understand why Iran's drone strike was so consequential, you need to understand what Iran had actually agreed to just 8 days earlier. Because the gap between what was signed in Switzerland on June 17th and what the IRGC did on June 25th is the gap between a peace deal and a provocation. The Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, was not a vague statement of intent. It was a 14-point document signed by both U.S. President Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, mediated by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and the Qatari government, and announced to the world as the framework for ending the most destructive military conflict in the Middle East in a generation. Its terms were specific. Iran agreed to allow safe passage for commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz for a 60-day negotiation period. The United States agreed not to launch new strikes and not to deploy additional forces to the region. Both sides agreed that the war on all fronts, including in Lebanon, would end. The MOU established a path toward discussing Iran's nuclear program, its frozen assets worth an estimated $25 billion, and the long-term future of Hormuz. But the MOU left one critical issue dangerously ambiguous. Article 5 of the document stated that Iran would make arrangements for the safe passage of commercial vessels through the strait, but it said nothing about who controlled the routing, nothing about which corridor ships could use. Nothing about whether Iran retained the right to designate approved paths and penalize ships that deviated from them. Iran interpreted this silence as authority. Within days of signing, Tehran announced the creation of the Persian Gulf Seaways Management Organization, a new Iranian body that would designate approved shipping routes through the strait and warn that vessels deviating from those routes would not be guaranteed safe passage. The route it designated skirted Iranian coastal waters so closely that Western shipping companies, commercial insurers, and NATO naval planners all raised immediate alarm. It was less a shipping lane and more a corridor of control, one that placed every commercial vessel passing through the strait under effective Iranian oversight. The United States said the route was unacceptable. Iran said the route was its interpretation of the MOU. The Qataris tried to mediate. The Omanis proposed alternatives. The United Nations Maritime Organization was in the process of coordinating an evacuation plan for more than 11,000 stranded sailors when the situation exploded. The IRGC and President Pezeshkian's government were not reading from the same script. Pezeshkian had signed the MOU. The IRGC was still deploying its surviving drone assets in the strait. And on the evening of June 25, 2026, the IRGC made a decision that the moderate government in Tehran either did not authorize or could not stop. It fired. Let us be precise about what happened, because precision matters when one side is calling it a ceasefire violation and the other side is calling it ceasefire management. The Singapore-flagged container ship MV Everlovely was exiting the Strait of Hormuz on June 25, 2026, traveling along the Omani coast southeast of a location called Dahit. The ship was not part of the United Nations evacuation framework. It was a commercial vessel carrying cargo, following a route that its operators believed was compliant with the MOU's provisions for commercial shipping. According to President Trump, Iranian forces launched 4 one-way attack drones, OWADs, at the Everlovely and ships in its vicinity. U.S. Navy assets in the strait intercepted and destroyed 3 of those drones. The 4th drone was not detected in time. It struck the upper deck of the Everlovely, causing significant damage to the vessel's superstructure. The ship sustained the hit and was able to proceed on its way. No crew members were killed. The one-way attack drone, the weapon Iran chose for this strike, is the Shahed series loitering munition, the same platform Iran has supplied to Russia in the hundreds of thousands for use in Ukraine. In its maritime variant, it has been adapted for sea-skimming flight, making it difficult to detect on radar until it is within seconds of impact. It travels at approximately 185 kilometers per hour, carries a warhead of around 40 kilograms, and costs an estimated $20,000 to $50,000 per unit. Compared to the multi-million-dollar interceptors required to shoot it down, Iran has turned the cost asymmetry of cheap drones into the central tool of its maritime harassment strategy. Trump posted his assessment within hours. A foolish violation of the ceasefire agreement. By that evening, he had told reporters at the White House, quote, "I don't like the fact that they took a shot yesterday. Actually 4, we knocked down 3, at a ship. Not an allied ship, but a ship. A very expensive ship. You can't do that stuff." And then, speaking directly to the question of consequences, Trump said 4 words that every IRGC commander in the Strait needed to hear. You will find out. On June 26, 2026, at the direction of Commander-in-Chief Donald Trump, U.S. Central Command aircraft struck Iranian military targets in and around the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM's official statement was precise. United States aircraft struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites in response to Iran's attack on the MV Everlovely. The statement added, the unwarranted aggression against commercial shipping by Iranian forces clearly violated the ceasefire. Targets confirmed as struck included infrastructure on Qeshm Island and other locations along Iran's southern coastline, installations that had been documented as components of Iran's remaining maritime strike capability. But Iran did not stop. The morning of June 27th brought the escalation that removed any ambiguity about Iranian intent. At 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the Panama-flagged oil tanker MT Kiku was struck by a one-way attack drone while traveling near the Strait of Hormuz. The Kiku was not a small vessel and not an empty one. U.S. Central Command confirmed that the tanker was carrying more than 2 million barrels of crude oil at the time of the strike. The drone hit the vessel, causing damage to its bridge. No crew fatalities were reported, but the symbolism of striking a tanker loaded with 2 million barrels of oil during a period when global energy markets were still absorbing the shock of months of Hormuz disruption was impossible to misread. Iran was given a chance. It elected not to take it. The second wave of American strikes on June 27th was broader in scope than the first. The target list had expanded. Where June 26th had focused on missile and drone storage and coastal radar, June 27th added surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, and, critically, mine-laying capabilities. According to a source familiar with the targeting details who spoke to the Jerusalem Post, 2 of the targets struck on June 27th were newly built by Iran, constructed after the war had begun, after previous strikes had destroyed earlier facilities. Iran had been rebuilding. The United States had been watching. And on the night of June 27th, the new construction was destroyed before it could become operational. CENTCOM confirmed the action in a statement on its social media platforms. U.S. military aircraft targeted Iranian military surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage facilities, and mine layer capabilities. The inclusion of mine-laying capabilities was significant. Iran's ability to lay new mines in the Strait, a capability that had already caused 4 to 6 weeks of clearance operations, had now been specifically targeted and degraded. In 48 hours, starting from a single drone fired at a cargo ship, the United States had destroyed or severely damaged every remaining category of Iran's maritime strike capability. Its drone storage, its radar coverage, its communications infrastructure, its air defenses, and its capacity to lay new mines. But the story did not end with American aircraft over Iran. Because the IRGC, an organization that had spent 4 decades building its identity around never backing down, responded. And in responding, it widened the conflict to 2 more countries and issued a threat that brought the peace talks to the edge of complete collapse. In the early hours of Sunday, June 29, 2026, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. local time, the IRGC's naval and aerospace forces launched a joint operation using ballistic missiles and drones against 2 targets, Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait, home to significant American military infrastructure, and the U.S. 5th Fleet headquarters at Port Salman in Bahrain. The IRGC described the operation as a decisive response to what it called American aggression and announced that it had destroyed 8 important U.S. military infrastructures across both targets. Kuwait's army confirmed that its air defense systems were activated to intercept incoming attacks. Bahrain's Interior Ministry issued emergency sirens across the country and told residents to move immediately to the nearest safe location. Dubai, which had been watching this escalation with mounting anxiety, received its first incoming missile alert since the ceasefire, sending a city of 3 million people into panic before authorities confirmed it was a false alarm. The United States military said that no American assets were hit and that no U.S. personnel were killed or wounded. But CENTCOM's silence was not the loudest voice in the room that night. The loudest voice was Trump's. The Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Not a threat about military installations. Not a threat about the nuclear program. A statement about the continued existence of the 47-year-old Islamic Republic itself. From the President of the United States. On his personal social media account at 3 a.m. Vice President J.D. Vance had posted earlier the same day, delivering the administration's message in fewer words but with equal clarity. Iran signed a ceasefire agreement. We have honored it. If they have disagreements about how the MOU is being applied, they can pick up the phone. But violence will be met with violence. Inside Iran, the political fracture that had been widening since the ceasefire was signed became impossible to ignore. Ebrahim Azizi, head of Iran's Parliamentary National Security Commission, posted on X that the United States had attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations and that the U.S. president had shown he had no commitment to the principles of negotiation or a ceasefire. The IRGC's own public statement warned that any further American strikes would result in a complete halt of all diplomatic processes. By June 29th, after 4 days of strikes and counterstrikes, both sides accepted a stand-down brokered by Qatari and Omani mediators. The shooting stopped. The technical talks in Doha, involving Iranian and American delegations communicating through Qatari and Pakistani intermediaries, resumed. But the MOU that had looked like a peace deal on June 17th now looked like a fragile, contested, barely surviving framework full of clauses neither side was implementing in the way the other understood. The events of June 25th to June 29th did not occur in a vacuum. They are the latest chapter in a conflict that has been producing extraordinary numbers since February 28th, 2026. Numbers that tell the full story of what Iran is still capable of and what the United States has already done to it. In terms of the war's overall scale, U.S. Central Command has confirmed strikes on more than 11,000 Iranian targets since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. American and Allied aircraft have flown more than 10,000 combat sorties over Iranian territory. 2/3 of Iran's missile, drone, and naval production facilities have been destroyed or severely damaged. 92% of Iran's largest Navy vessels have been destroyed, according to CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper. Iranian ballistic missile launches decreased by 86% from day one of the war to the time of the ceasefire, according to Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane. In terms of the ceasefire period's escalation specifically, 2 commercial vessels struck, the Singapore-flagged MV Everlovely on June 25th and the Panama-flagged MT Kiku on June 27th, the latter carrying over 2 million barrels of crude oil. 4 drones fired at the Everlovely, 3 intercepted by U.S. assets, 1 hitting the vessel. 1 drone striking the Kiku at 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time on June 27th. 2 rounds of U.S. retaliatory strikes, June 26th and June 27th, targeting missile storage, drone storage, coastal radar, surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, and mine-laying capabilities. 2 newly constructed Iranian facilities, built since earlier strikes, destroyed before they became operational. In terms of Iran's domestic condition, inflation at 88.6% year-on-year as of June 2026. The civilian sailor toll from Hormuz area incidents since the April ceasefire stands at 13 dead. More than 11,000 sailors remain stranded in the strait as the IMO evacuation plan remains paused. Iran's total confirmed war dead stand at a minimum of 3,636 by humanitarian counts, with American and Israeli estimates placing the figure above 6,000. More than 26,500 wounded, including at least 4,000 women and 1,621 children. In terms of the diplomatic picture, the June 17th MOU signed by both presidents established a 60-day negotiation window. That window is now running. The Doha technical talks, held indirectly through Qatari and Pakistani mediators, resumed after the June 29th stand-down but are focused on MOU implementation rather than the nuclear issue. Iran's negotiating position, as stated by President Pezeshkian, is that the ballistic missile program is not subject to negotiation and that Iran will commit in writing only to not building a bomb, not to dismantling its enrichment capability. The Trump administration's position, as stated by White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, is that Iran will not be permitted to enrich uranium at any level. One side believes it has all the cards. The other side still controls the only 33-kilometer waterway through which 20% of the world's oil passes every day. And somewhere between those two positions, 11,000 sailors are waiting for someone to tell them they can go home. Now, and this is the part that requires the most careful analysis, neither side's public position tells the complete story of what is actually happening, and giving you only the dramatic narrative without the structural reality underneath it would be a disservice. So let us look at what is genuinely unresolved and why these 60 days may not produce the outcome either side is claiming to want. The IRGC and the Pezeshkian government are not the same actor. This is the most important and most underreported fact of the ceasefire crisis. The elected Iranian government negotiated and signed the MOU. The IRGC, which answers directly to the supreme leader and not to the president, launched the drones that violated it. This is not an accident. It reflects a genuine power struggle inside the Islamic Republic between a moderate government trying to end the war on terms that preserve the regime's survival and a military organization that sees accommodation with the United States as an existential threat to its own power and funding. The drones Iran should never have fired may not have been authorized by the people who signed the deal. The Strait of Hormuz routing dispute is not resolved. The fundamental disagreement that sparked the June 25th escalation, who controls which shipping corridors and whether Iran retains supervisory authority over vessels transiting the strait, remains completely unresolved in the MOU text. Iran has claimed the right to designate routes and to treat ships deviating from those routes as non-compliant. The United States has said Iran cannot toll or control the strait, which it considers an international waterway under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Until this specific clause is resolved in writing, both sides are operating under different interpretations of the same document. Drones can be launched again any night. The nuclear question is the iceberg beneath the waterline. The June 25th to 27th escalation was about drones and shipping lanes. But the 60-day MOU is actually about something much larger. Whether Iran will agree to dismantle its nuclear enrichment program or merely commit to not building a weapon. These are not the same thing. The Trump administration is demanding zero enrichment. Iran is demanding the right to civilian enrichment at low levels, consistent with the 2015 JCPOA framework. On July 2, 2026, Iran announced that IAEA inspectors would be denied entry to its Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites under any circumstances. The nuclear deal that is supposed to be the ultimate product of the 60-day MOU has not even begun to be negotiated. And the regional picture complicates everything. The MOU stipulated that the war would end on all fronts, including Lebanon. Israel has continued striking Lebanon. Hezbollah has continued attacking Israeli forces. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that Lebanon was not included in the deal. Trump backed him. Iran and Hezbollah said this directly contradicts the MOU they signed. Every Israeli strike in Lebanon is, in Iran's interpretation, a violation of the ceasefire that justifies Iranian retaliation, which in turn justifies American counterstrikes, which in turn threatens the diplomatic process that is the only alternative to resumed full-scale war. This is not a peace deal. It is a 60-day countdown, and with 11,000 sailors still in the strait, with Iran's IRGC still capable of launching drones any night it chooses, and with the nuclear question still entirely unresolved, the countdown has already cost 2 more ships, a near breakdown of the ceasefire in its first week, and a presidential threat that the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Iran signed a ceasefire on June 17th. 8 days later, its military fired drones at a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump called it foolish and struck back. Iran struck U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. The United States struck again. Both sides accepted a stand-down on June 29th. And now they are back in Doha, talking through intermediaries, pretending that a deal is still possible, while the IRGC rebuilds what it can and the B-52s remain at RAF Fairford. More than 11,000 targets struck, more than 11,000 sailors stranded. Inflation at 88.6% in Iran. A supreme leader who has not been seen in public since the day the war began. A ceasefire violated within 8 days, and a U.S. president who has publicly stated that the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist if it continues down this path. 60 days. That is what the MOU bought, and the clock is already running. So here is the question we are putting to you in the comments. Obviously, this is a foolish violation of our ceasefire agreement. Iran's inflation rate had reached 88.6% year-on-year by June 2026. Its military had suffered more than 11,000 airstrikes since February 28th. 2/3 of its missile, drone, and naval production facilities had been destroyed or damaged. Its supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had been assassinated in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. Its new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, had not been seen in public since the war began. And yet, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which answers only to the supreme leader and not to the elected government, was not done fighting. CENTCOM's statement after the Kiku strike was the most direct language the command had used since the ceasefire was signed. After yesterday's U.S. strikes in response to the Iranian attack on MV Everlovely, Iran was given a chance to honor the ceasefire agreement, but elected not to. United States aircraft just struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites for violating the ceasefire agreement again. There may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job that we very successfully started. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Iran had come to Doha to negotiate. The IRGC had come to the Strait of Hormuz to fight. These were not the same, Iran. And the gap between them, between a government that had signed the MOU and a military that was undermining it, was becoming the central strategic question of the entire conflict. J.D. Vance summarized the American position at its most concise. We have all the cards in the negotiation. We obviously want it to be successful, but even if it's not successful, we've accomplished the core mission, which is to ensure that the Iranians never have a nuclear weapon. Political scientist Chris Featherstone of the University of York put it plainly: Trump has painted himself into a corner. He is unwilling to concede further to Iran because it would not fit the narrative of U.S. strength. Iran is maintaining the same conditions it set before the war began. Neither side has changed its fundamental position. The MOU has not bridged that gap. It has paused it. Can the 60-day MOU survive its own contradictions? The IRGC versus the Pezeshkian government, the Hormuz routing dispute, the nuclear gap between zero enrichment and civilian enrichment, and an Israel-Lebanon front that neither side has actually stopped fighting? Or will the next IRGC drone, the next unresolved clause, the next Israeli strike in Beirut be the moment this fragile framework finally breaks and Operation Epic Fury resumes with no ceasefire to violate? Leave your answer below. The whole world is watching this 60-day window. So are we. And we rate every single comment presented by your channel. Thank you for choosing us.